One of them is in the silence you meet yourself. Now, that may be an uncomfortable meeting for a lot of people.
What is your meaning of life?
Listen. Speaking is very, very important. It's what people tend to obsess about. It's quite interesting that my TED talk about speaking is the one that went ballistic. It's been seen by 5 times as many people as my TED talk on listening. So we're all very keen to be heard, but we can't be bothered to listen. And that's not an equation that works very well.
Yes.
You just end up with a world where everybody's shouting, which I think is a pretty accurate characterization of the world we're creating. In fact, social media I often describe it as personal broadcasting. It's all very outbound focused.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way we tend to operate today. So you mentioned we have tools to be connected. And this is very much Sherry Turkle's thesis in her book Alone Together, or her book Reclaiming Conversation, that technology, far from bringing us together, is in many very important ways driving us apart. It's creating isolation, loneliness, disconnection, polarization, alienation, hatred, judgmentalism. All these things we see on the rise in the world. And, the alarming statistics, particularly among younger people, show that also on the rise, we have depression, anxiety, neurosis, suicide, alienation. I mean, all sorts of negative aspects of life. I mean, shocking statistics that like 1 in 10 college students have considered suicide. I mean, that was not true 30 or 40 years ago. And it's true now because of this world that we've created. So yes, to me, listening is the foundation of all relationships. Listening always creates understanding. Conscious listening, I would describe, and we can talk about what I mean by conscious listening in a moment, but conscious listening always creates understanding, and understanding is what glues our relationships together.
Right.
And it's what glues our societies together as well. I mean, how can I live next door to somebody with whom I fundamentally disagree if I don't at least make an effort to understand why they think what they think and accept that they have a different view from me, rather than making them wrong, hating them because they're different, which is where we're heading. So, in short,
Yeah.
yes.
Yes. So conscious listening, like as a lay person who's trying to understand communication, if I try to break it down, I was listening to you for the past 3 minutes right now, and then there's processing happening in my brain, and then I can literally give out any words from the English dictionary right now to make particular combination to have a really engaging conversation. So I see those as 3 parts. The way I listen to what you're saying and trying to interpret it from a right angle, and then run it in my mind to give out a more present output, which is my speaking. So are these the 3 parts to speaking, or is there more to the story? I understand that you explained the pyramid in a very interesting manner, and is this the way we the cycle works.
The pyramid's only one visualization. I'll give you a more useful one. It's the one that really is at the foundation of all my work, which is what I call the circle of communication. That is to say that speaking and listening are not in a straight line relationship. It's not I speak, you listen. Whether you want to include your mental processing as part of that process or not, we have to be careful with that. Stephen Covey talks about listening to respond as opposed to listening to understand. If we get into what I call speech writing, which is while this noise is going on in front of me, that's you speaking, I'm actually composing my next brilliant bit of monologue. That's not listening. That's not really listening. That's not true listening. So the circle of communication is that speaking and listening are related in a circular way, because the way I speak affects the way you listen, and the way you listen affects the way I speak, and on and on. And that all happens inside of a context, which in many cases is not very helpful. Poor acoustics, background noise, and so forth. These things tend to get in our way a lot of the time. So my work is about those three things. It's about improving the quality of the power and quality of our speaking, improving the consciousness of our listening. And again, we come back to that in a moment. And also taking responsibility for the context in which we are communicating. So actually being aware that that background noise is not helpful, maybe moving somewhere else if we're trying to work or speak or listen, trying to make sure that the context is optimal. And that's all about sound and noise, which is the other big thing I teach about and write about. So conscious listening is very important. What I mean by that is that listening is not a capability. Hearing is a capability. Everybody hears, or at least everybody who hasn't got damaged hearing. And that's, 1 in 10 of the world's population currently has got damaged hearing. And that's getting much worse with many millions of young people joining those ranks, sadly, in the coming years due to headphone abuse, listening for hours to very loud music delivered deep into their ear canals, and that's killing their hearing. We have to be very careful with this, and many people just aren't aware of that problem. But let's leave aside hearing. It's a capability. It's a very important capability, actually. I don't say leave it aside, but I mean, it is an important thing. It's our primary warning sense for two reasons. First, I can hear what's behind me. And secondly, I can hear in the dark. Now, your eyes work in either of those two very important situations. So hearing has been critical for millions of years in our evolution as our primary warning sense, as a warning of danger, keeping us safe, guiding us to food, drink, water, other people, and allowing us to communicate with each other as well. But it's a capability. You don't have to do anything to hear. You do it naturally. It's as natural as your heart beating. Listening is different. It's a skill. It's work. It's a mental process. It takes effort. And if you don't know that you're doing something, if you're not conscious that you're actually working and listening, you're probably not listening very well. Most people confuse and conflate those two things. So they think listening is, yeah, of course I listen. I mean, everybody listens. Most people don't listen very well at all. And it's difficult to get this across because everybody likes to think they listen really well. We all do. We all think, oh, yes, I'm a good listener. Sadly, if you're not conscious that this is a skill that you can practice and master, and if you haven't done any work on it, you're probably not a master of it, then you're probably listening pretty poorly. Now, when I say conscious listening, what I mean by that is being conscious that you're doing something and of the way you're doing it. So my definition of listening is making meaning from sound. It's a mental process. It's interpreting, choosing certain things to pay attention to and then interpreting them and ascribing meaning to them. And obviously in a conversation, that's somebody else's words. Now, there are many ways to do that. I'm not an absolutist. You'll come across descriptions of ways to listen. Active listening is one of the most common that's used in business, and it gets very performative. It always reminds me, active listening and the way it's being kind of bastardized is very like what happened with karate when it came to America, where karate actually is a very spiritual path. If you go back to the roots of the form. But when it came to America, lots and lots of karate schools set up, basically trying to teach people how to beat people up. So it was kind of taking a bit, the easy bit, out of what was a much wider river, just choosing one little piece of it and teaching that because that's what people wanted. And I think active listening has got similarities to that as in the way it's taught in business. It becomes a very performative thing. Oh, yeah, I get you. I'm listening to you, pretending to listen.
Yeah.
Well, at the same time, being quite dismissive, judgmental, and there's all sorts of stuff going on behind the scenes. It's all about efficiency and so forth. So I'm not a big fan of that phrase. The reason I use conscious listening is because I do think there are many ways to listen, and it's all about what's appropriate in the here and now. So, for example, you could go from distracted listening, which is what we do a great deal of the time in the modern world. No, I am listening to you. Tap, 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 tap. No, you're sending a text. Well, that's distracted listening. It's not real, true listening in the sense that Scott Peck meant it when he said you cannot truly listen to another person and do anything else at the same time. Well, that's one form of listening. That's very focused, attentive listening, which is at the opposite end of the scale, I suppose, from that distracted listening that we do a lot of the time. There's nothing wrong. I'm not judging either of those. If you're telling me a little joke and, we're having a little laugh or banter, I could be cooking, sending a text, twiddling with something. That's fine. I'm giving you a bit of my attention. And you're giving me something that's light and frothy and not very important. But if you're sharing something deep, meaningful, maybe some pain or, anguish or something deeply meaningful to you, or it's complicated, then I do you a great disservice by listening in that way. I need to move myself into a different, what I call listening position. And there are many, many, many listening positions. And the key about conscious listening is to be asking yourself the question, where could I best listen from in this conversation or in this situation? And moving to the most appropriate and effective listening position, which may be, in business, critical listening. But with your family, you might want to be more in empathic listening with your heart. So you see what I mean? There are lots of ways to listen. The key is to be conscious, first of all, that you're doing something, you're exercising a skill. And secondly, what's the best way I can do that in this situation? This is all going back to your very original comment and the raison d'etre of this podcast. This is all about becoming a more conscious human being more in touch with the world around you, more related to other people, and more conscious of what you're doing and how you can grow as a human being.
You explained it really beautifully, and it's bursting a million questions in my mind. But I think one that particularly stands out is, so you were talking right now. So I was just observing the process, what was happening. I was listening to you keenly, but there is still a part of me, maybe it's the curiosity part, that wants to ask a question, but that's also taking a bit of processing power. It actually is taking me a bit away from listening in some sense. So do you actually deter that process? Because in order for conscious listening, as you just explained, you also need to respond back to them, right? Not just react back to the person to give them the respect that the time and the energy they were offering, but still it's taking me away from listening. So is it like Should I take a break after the other person is done talking? Should I be like, okay, now I'll process this thing quickly and then I'll give the appropriate response, or should I do the parallel?
We do have amazing brains, and it's very difficult to be completely an empty vessel when you're listening. It's a process that's not dissimilar to meditation. You know, if you meditate, you're sitting there and you have a thought. Now, some people get very frustrated with, oh, no, I just had a thought. I've failed. I'm useless. No, all you have to do is go, oh, well, there's a thought. Bye-bye. Put it away and go back. And oh, there's another thought. It's not about being bad or judged. It's just about repeating, getting back into your process and being patient and focused. So it's the same when you're listening. Of course, you'll have thoughts come up. It's very difficult not to. And particularly if somebody speaks for quite a long time, which I just did, and gives you quite a lot of content, which I just did, the frustrating thing will be if you're an empty vessel, you forget the questions you wanted to ask or the things you wanted to say. You can take notes. People often ask me, can I take notes when I'm listening? Of course you can. And that's actually quite a good way of allowing the things to flow through you without becoming too disruptive. Because if you get into, oh no, that's the 9th question I want to ask, I've got to remember them all, then you're going to be filling your brain up with stuff and compromising your ability to be present. So I think note-taking is quite good. And of course, we've got, thanks to AI, in many conversations, we now have that laid on for us. So you don't have to take the notes. And if you want to come back with the questions afterwards, or maybe in a future conversation, you log the questions and come back and ask them later, that works too. But in a natural conversation, when there are two people back and forth, of course you'll have things going on. Fortunately, you have got an incredible brain, and your brain can parallel process to a degree. As long as you're focused on being present and you understand that listening is a little bit akin to meditation. It's a passive process. You allow the sound in, you allow the processing to take place, and try not to speechwrite and prepare your bit in advance. You have to trust that when it comes to your turn, your mouth will know what to do.
Mhm.
And it's amazing that that is actually the case. If you give it that little bit of trust, your mouth is actually, your brain and your mouth will take over, and it'll flow.
Yeah, I love the way you presented it akin to meditation, because but then again, the question that came is you compared it to a passive process versus you said conscious listening is an active process. In that sense, in the modern day world, can active listening be replaced? Can replace the word meditation altogether?
Well, I guess, yes, there is a dichotomy there. I mean, you could say the same thing about meditation, couldn't you? It's an active process in that you have to keep resetting, you have to be on the path, you have to be focused, and forgive yourself and so forth. There's a lot of process to it, but it's also passive in the sense that, you're allowing things to take place. And I suppose with listening, um, there are the two sides to it. I would probably come down on the side of active, in the sense that listening is a skill, it's work, it's effort, and it is a thing you're doing. But it is passive in the sense that you don't have to say anything, you don't have to be doing stuff externally to listen. So it looks much more passive. I mean, hearing is a passive sense. Sound actually comes inside your head and touches you. It's a very intimate sense. So it's much more, in that sense, feminine. It's much more yin. And that's possibly why women tend to be better listeners, according to all the research, as do introverts, by the way. So there are scales of listening. The people who probably find it hardest to listen are male extroverts, and particularly leaders who are supposed to know stuff, tell people things. and be in charge. And there's all this kind of pressure on them not to listen, but to be telling. It's a very much more of an outbound kind of ethos that they have to have. And that makes it, as you get more senior in an organization, it makes it harder and harder to be a great listener, which is unfortunate because the best leaders are good listeners. You have to listen to understand the people you're leading. I'm just thinking of, Emily Casriel has a lovely book called Deep Listening. And at the beginning of that book, she recounts a lovely story of Nelson Mandela, who came into a situation where there were a large number of very angry soldiers in rebellion about, I don't know, they weren't being paid properly or something, but they were really up in arms. He walked into that situation and walked through them and spent an hour or more listening to each of them, relating to them. Where are you from? Oh, I know that. Yeah, I know that street. Do you know this person? So what's your problem? Listening, listening, listening. So by the time he got to the stage to speak to them, the atmosphere had completely changed. They felt heard. And that is a very important gift that we can give to people, that gift of feeling heard. It's one of the greatest gifts we can give to our children, particularly.
Yeah, that's really funny. First time, funny at the same time, a very conscious observation. Is there any study on this?
On what particularly?
On the people who go up in leadership tend to listen less?
Yes, there was a piece of research very recently which asked, I think it was about 20,000 employees. It was many, many thousands anyway. And it was a little bit depressing, the result, because the proportion of those employees who rated their leader as a very good listener was 8%, 1 in 12. In other words, 11 in 12 are not very good listeners. They might have been rated as good or average or poor. I'm not saying they're all poor, but only 1 in 12 was rated as a very good listener. And that's quite disturbing because the effects of not listening in business particularly are things like miscommunication and disengagement. And again, there's plenty of research about those two things. And if I tell you the accumulated cost of those two things globally, you won't believe the number. It's in excess of $10 trillion a year, research based. The cost of miscommunication and disengagement, employee disengagement, which are the obvious results of not being listened to. I mean, it's very similar to, what's happening in our political spheres around the world, where you've got the politics of not being listened to for a long time, which has caused the rise of populism. It's caused polarization because people feel angry about not being listened to, and they start blaming and so forth. And hence we end up with populist leaders who are elected simply because people think they're different and they're going to listen. Well, of course they won't, because that's not what politicians do, unfortunately. But that's a kind of head of steam which comes up nationally, it comes up in organizations, it comes up in families. You never listen to me, the most common complaint probably in relationships. And it's a huge divider of people. We want to feel heard. And if we want to feel heard, my suggestion is start listening, because it's a virtuous cycle. If you start listening to other people, it helps them to start listening to you.
Right. Which takes me to something else that I wanted to discuss is, there's this idea of philosophia versus philonikia, meaning philosophia is meaning love for ideas, and philonikia meaning it's I might be confusing the words wrong, but I'll give out the idea anyway. So it's like people, especially in modern times, attach their identity to ideas, to being right all the time, and that this conflates active listening and communication, because then the ego becomes involved, because you got so much of your identity. For example, I might be a leftist or a rightist, and I might belong to this religion or that religion. I have certain set of other beliefs which I want to be true, or I want to give it out to the world, and they don't want to change that because it's so much tied to their identity. They identify themselves in the world with that. Versus the other side of the story is treating it just as an idea for cooperation, for spreading love or whatever. If you look at it from that sense, then I believe it's easier to communicate, and then there's less ego involved. Am I right to think in that sense?
I agree with you more. Being right is one of the two human tendencies I talk about a great deal in my teaching, in my workshops, in my keynote speeches, and in my books. There is being right and there's looking good. And those two things both get in the way of listening to other people. They're looking good because we like to beat them and win and, be better and bigger and, and we disguise ourselves in order to be impressive. And the being right it's an epidemic in the world, which has been increased by quantum amounts by social media, of course. And the easiest way to be right is to make somebody else wrong. If I make you wrong, then I elevate myself and I lower you in the scale of, virtue and anything else I care to think of. So that is what so many people are doing. You only have to look at the comments under a YouTube video or even a news piece in a quality newspaper to see the amount of bile, hatred, judgmentalism, dogma that's going on. And there's a very interesting observation here. Science proceeds by holding lightly the current best explanation for a phenomenon, which is a theory. There are no facts in science. There are the best current explanation for observed phenomena. And when a better one comes along, then good scientists jump at it and get excited and go, wow, that's great. We've got a new, better explanation than the one we've been believing for decades. And that's happening over and over again right now in physics, where, our basic understanding of the cosmos, the fundamental, what's it called, the lambda, model is being challenged left, right, and center. And they're all excited about it. Well, if we held our opinions as lightly as good scientists hold theories, and we would entertain alternative opinions in the way they are excitedly entertaining new theories, what an easier world it would be to live in. But we don't. We get very attached to opinions, to perspectives, and they become part of who we are. And they become entrenched, and we defend them with aggression, even violence, when they're not facts, they're opinions, or they're ideas, or beliefs. So, you can talk about a lot of people's religious beliefs in this sense, also political beliefs, also all sorts of isms that people hold, judgmental views on large groups of people, caricatures of people. And if we would simply allow those to be challenged, the world would move much more lightly, and we would all get on a whole lot better. And to me, that's about listening. Listening to me is the cure for all of this stuff. If we just taught, and let me go right down to the base level here. If we taught children first how to listen and how to be master listeners, what a different world we'd be in. But we teach children how to read and write. We do not teach children how to speak and listen, which is completely crazy, in my opinion. Now, that's a lightly held opinion. I'm willing to be challenged on that, but I do think there's a lot of evidence that this is fundamental, because most most of us grow up without even realizing that listening is a skill. We conflate it with hearing. We think we do it well when we don't. And we have all this stuff, this baggage in the way of our listening. I talk about listening filters. There's a whole set of filters we listen through, which tend to create a listening position that becomes ossified. We listen in a certain way most of the time. So most people aren't consciously saying, where's the best place I could listen from? We're in a kind of bunker that we've created over the years. It's the culture we're born into, the language we learn to speak, the values, attitudes, and beliefs that we pick up along the way from parents, friends, role models, whoever it might be, teachers. And then in any given situation, we may have intentions, expectations, assumptions, emotions, and our physical state changes as well. So our listening changes through the day. When you're tired, happy, unhappy, excited, angry, your listening is different. And it changes from person to person. So there's a fundamental truth here that almost nobody understands, which is that your listening is unique. It's as unique as your fingerprints. So there's another very important question to ask yourself in communication, which is, what's the listening I'm speaking into? My
Yeah.
listening's unique. And if I become conscious of my filters, I can start to change them and challenge them and move my listening position. Your listening's unique, and I can't change it, but I can try to sense it and communicate with you in a way that is most likely going to get the ball over the net and have you receive what I sent in a
Right.
productive way.
So when you mean by filters, is it my beliefs then, or is it my emotions that kind of changes the way I respond to
All of
whatever I'm getting?
all of those things. Yeah, the culture you're born into. You're born into a different culture to me. You may have learned from birth to speak a different language to me. I mean, I don't know what your first language is, but language colors our listening because certain languages have different concepts. I mean, some languages have different words for things or don't have words for things at all. It's true that the northern peoples, the northern native peoples, the Inuit and so forth, have many, many, many words for snow, dozens of words for snow. That's not an urban fairy tale. It's absolutely true. Um, there are all sorts of colorations. The culture we're born into, which may be a family, it might be a clan, a tribe, a national culture, a regional culture. Cultures come with all sorts of loaded assumptions about generalizations about the way the world works. So we're always making assumptions, and a lot of them are unconscious assumptions, which color the way we're listening. I
Exactly.
think it's one very important aspect of this, going back to the being right thing, is to understand that two people can have extremely different views and both be right in their own world from their perspective, given their history, given what's happened to them. Now, it's not very productive for one person to say to the other, you're wrong. It's much more productive to say, I don't agree with you, but I can understand why you think that. That's called validation. And to me, validation is the single biggest missing thing in the world today because it allows us to deal with difference in a compassionate way. And there's a tool I teach in my work, which I call PAVE, easy to remember. It's an acronym, and it's very useful to apply in conflict or difficult situations where you have a difference of opinion. The P stands for paraphrase, where I would say, okay, what I heard you say is this. Did I get you? Did I understand? So that's checking that I received what you sent, which isn't always the case. But that's, the first level at which we can misunderstand each other. The A stands for admit, and that is letting you be right, admitting into me that you have a valid perspective, not judging it, simply saying, okay, well, that's what he believes. And if I admit it, into myself and let you be right, even though you're different from me and even it's not what I think, I can then do the V, which is validate, which is, as I said, I can understand why you think that. I don't agree, but I totally get why you think that. And that then allows me to do the E of pave, which is empathize. So given that's the way you think and that's what you believe, I can see why this thing just upset you. It wouldn't have upset me, but I totally get why you were upset by it.
Hmm.
We're different people.
Yeah,
Now,
I remember.
validation
Yeah,
is the
please.
secret sauce. It is absolutely what's missing in the world.
Yeah, I remember reading somewhere the best way to take a coat off of someone is to make them warm from the inside so that they take it out themselves.
Perfect. Lovely analogy.
Yeah, that still remains in my mind when I'm having a conversation. Ah, but then again, just to play devil's advocate there, do you think truth is subjective or there is an objective truth that people can try to lay down or try to come into when having conversations?
Um, well, that's a very deep philosophical question, which people have been debating for millennia. So I'm not the right person to give you a categorical answer to that. But I can say, if you're talking about a human experience, that we have rules that we all agree on, and or most of us agree on, apart from the odd psychopath. So there are basic truths of being a human being, um, and yet there is a great deal of flexibility. One of the things I teach people quite early in my courses and books is to be clear about their values. What's the North Star of you? Now, I have 4 values that I determined a long time ago, which allow me to live my life in a way that's consistent and it makes decision making much easier. And those values are, they spell the word flag. I like 4-letter acronyms because I have a terrible memory. Faith, love, acceptance, and gratitude. I urge anybody listening to this to sit down and write down your values. Construct something that you feel really describes the way you want to be, what drives you, what's important to you, the things you live by. Because once you've done that, it makes it an awful lot easier to make decisions and to move in the right direction through your life, hopefully onward and upward around the spiral staircase. So values are very important. So I don't think, if you're talking about the truth of being a human being, I don't think there is one. No, there are certain things we agree on in order to get by. We have a lot of challenges right now with things coming up which we've never met before. I'm not a fan of
Absolutely.
social media, as you can tell, and AI is going to change the game completely. So we have a lot that we're facing where we don't have rules. We don't have any experience to work on. But we do know that violence, killing, hurting children, incest, these are all things which are no-go as human beings. We pretty much all agree that there are rules, and those are the truths, I suppose. Most people, I guess, if you ask them their purpose, would be quite confused. I think the majority of people on this planet haven't sat down and thought clearly about their purpose as a human being on planet Earth and what they are setting out to achieve. So most of us tend to bumble through our lives. So truth isn't a concept, I think, that really many people face full on and challenge themselves with. What is my truth? What's the truth of my existence? What's the reason I'm here? I mean, these are very big questions. They're good to ponder. And I think in practical terms, if you can create some values and live a life that's consistent with those values, that's a very good first step. My purpose is to grow every day. My mission in the world is to regenerate the world's listening. I'm very clear about those things. And dear listener, if you haven't thought about those things, it's a very good exercise. It's a very important part, I think, of being a conscious human being, to be clear about your purpose, your mission, your values.
Amazing. When so I'm taking you back a little bit. So when I'm talking in real world to a person who is, say, dogmatic or who has so much ego that they just want to talk, they don't want to listen. How do we have those hard conversations?
Well, it depends on what you want to achieve. If you're saying that you want to share somebody with something with somebody who doesn't listen, is inveterately not a listener. There is a technique for doing that. I call it agreements, where I would say, okay, Raj, I have something very important I want to say to you. Can you give me 5 minutes of your undivided attention? Not now. When would be good? Tomorrow? 10? Okay, great. So I make an appointment with you, and you've given me a commitment. Now, we all like to be true to our word. So if we start that 5 minutes and you are sitting doing your email or something, I think I have a right to say at that point, Raj, you did say you'd give me 5 minutes or 10 minutes of your undivided attention. Now, that can work very well, even with somebody who is a very poor listener, doesn't pay attention. So that's a good way of breaking that process. But if you're talking about somebody who's very, very dogmatic and won't brook counter views and so forth, that's very difficult. There's not a lot of future in saying to somebody, do you know what, you're a terrible listener? You're not going to get a great response to that, unfortunately. And I would say the best way to break that down over time is to listen to them, reflect back. Very often, if somebody is stream of consciousness dogmatic and saying something that's, maybe mildly outrageous or rude or judgmental or perhaps gossiping about somebody else, or if it's ill-intentioned, if you reflect back to them, again, the paraphrase thing. So what I heard you say is this, is that what you actually believe? It gives them pause for thought. And you might get the response, oh, okay, well, maybe I just overstepped the mark a little there.
Hmm.
So it gives a moment to reflect on perhaps something that came out of an emotional response in some way, shape, or form. So I hope those are two concepts that help answer that
Yeah,
question
yeah.
you just.
Yes, that's interesting because when you're committing someone to take out essentially the voice in their head and then just to process what I'm saying, then there is no fight back or no walls built inside your head. And then at that point, you can consciously listen and have a two-way conversation.
Yeah, definitely. Also, generally, universally, the best way to improve the listening of the people around you is to listen to them. And I'm passionate about this with children, particularly. So, I have a 4-year-old daughter and an 11-year-old, and I'm extremely rigorous about eye to eye contact, not standing over them, talking down to a little person who's, 2 feet tall or whatever it is. But I sit down and I put my 4-year-old daughter on my knee. So we're eye to eye. And that's a conversation which leaves her feeling fully heard. And I'm extremely passionate about this form of parenting, eye to eye, really listening to your children. Uh, There's few things I dislike more, few sayings I dislike more than that Victorian saying of children should be seen and not heard. That is an absolute disaster for love, development, happiness, relationships. I mean, every other way. I don't know how the Victorians survived if that's what they thought. So I think children need to be heard. And if you teach children that being heard is important by listening to them, you'll find the children will listen to you.
Hmm.
It's a wonderful virtuous circle you can get into.
See, and now what's interesting in what you're saying is that in order to actually understand sound, we must have a bit of sight involved in it.
Well, you listen. I did some work with an American teacher some time ago. We created a syllabus for teaching small children, and she talks about listening with your ears, your eyes, and your heart,
Hmm.
which I think is a nice breakdown. So
Yeah.
it is important. There's another little acronym I teach, RASA, which is the Sanskrit word for juice, actually. But it's in this context, it's a very useful acronym to remember in general conversation. The R means receive. That is, look at the person who's talking. There are a few things more irritating than talking to somebody who's staring away or looking at something else or doing a text or whatever, because they clearly are not listening to you. They're not giving you their attention. And it's a great gift, really givable by all of us at any time, to give somebody our attention. I understand it's more difficult because there are some very big corporations, organizations spending billions and billions of dollars to seize your attention and mine for hours a day. So there are many distractions. I love that book, Indistractable by Nir Eyal, where he talks about ways of getting out of this trap. So, don't do email in bed late at night when you're lying next to your partner. How about having a conversation? That kind of thing. So the R is receive. It's look at the person, pay attention, give them your attention. The A is appreciate the little noises we make in conversation, head bobs, eyebrow raises. Oh, really? The S is summarize. So it's back to the idea of paraphrasing. So what I understood is this, and the A is ask questions, ideally open-ended questions: why, what, which, when, where, who, those kind of questions that don't allow the answer yes or no. RASA, receive, appreciate, summarize, ask. It's a very nice flow to be there with somebody and practice that in conversation. And you'll find if you do that, they will start to give you more attention back. It's like the cycle of life, isn't it? Give and you receive. Take and it all gets much more difficult. So let's get the wheel going in the right way. Give people your listening and your attention, and you'll get that back from them.
Hmm. What are your thoughts on humor?
Humor,
Yes.
important. I mean, I think having a good sense of humor is an absolutely critical element of being a successful and happy human being. Not taking yourself too seriously, particularly not taking yourself too seriously. And so, yes, humor in that level is critical. If we become too serious, a lot of things go wrong. I don't think it's necessary to be a comedian in order to be listened to. I mean, if that's your natural way, brilliant. I love watching comedians. I have huge respect for people who are superb at improv and so forth. These are skills that you can go and do classes in. They're very useful things if you want to be a charismatic speaker, and particularly improv, if you want to be able to deal with things being thrown at you from left field, heckling when you're talking, those kinds of things. If you have to deal with that, that's it's a brilliant skill. But I don't think it's necessary to be a comedian in order to be successful in life. But having a good sense of humor and not taking yourself too seriously, absolutely fundamental.
People take themselves too seriously these days, and especially as we pointed out a bit earlier, with the advent of AI and algorithms determining what we see, it sort of makes echo chambers, and then it just grows our beliefs and then gives us that comfort bubble to stay in, and then just to involve with the same communities rather than pushing ourselves out of our comfort zones. Is that hindering the evolution of human consciousness as a species?
Not just hindering, it's taking it back to the Stone Age, if you ask me. I think it's tragic that, whatever advances we made in compassion and, looking at thesis, antithesis, and synthesis as a process. So growing and adding and synthesizing all sorts of alternative views to become more rounded and deeper in our appreciation of the planet, the universe, other people. We're losing a lot of that. So I talk a lot about we are losing our listening. I think it's desperate right now. And you can see the effects of this in every country in the world, pretty much. Polarization, hatred, violence, street violence, um, the politics of despair almost everywhere, where it's now unthinkable for a politician to agree with somebody in opposition. That wasn't the case once. People used to be able to say, "Oh, the honourable member has an excellent point. We'll certainly take that on board." You could say that in the old days, not anymore. You have to violently disagree with people. So we're pulling apart. And unfortunately, as we discussed earlier, people are becoming wedded to their opinions. They're embedding their opinions in their own view of themselves. These opinions are becoming part of them. And we are in danger, I'm afraid, of fragmenting. I mean, I think democracy is in danger globally because it relies on understanding other people. It relies on being able to live next door to people with whom we disagree. And, if there's 51 of you and 49 of me, it's your rules. And it's not going to work if the moment that happens, I start fighting in the streets and, trying to attack people who disagree with me. That's going to result in global anarchy, which we're seeing also. So, I'm sorry to sound negative, but I am really concerned about the way this is all moving right now. And I think, the answer to a lot of this is so simple. Teach children how to listen. Make our children brilliant listeners. Teach them the value of listening. I talk about the 4 C's of listening. Consciousness, listening consciously, understanding this is a thing you're doing and you can do it in different ways. Compassion, listening to understand the other person. Commitment, actually being committed to listen, to do this well. And curiosity, seeing everybody as an opportunity to learn something and maybe to change your opinion and, get a new one that might be better. So those 4 C's, if we taught our children those things and some listening techniques and gave them practice in it, what a different world we'd have. In one generation, we could move from this violent, polarized, aggressive, right and wrong existence, this zero-sum game we're all playing. We could move to a world which is much more holistic, much more compassionate, much more variegated, much more accepting of, and indeed embracing of difference. When we put differences together as human beings, we do wonderful things. That's always been the case.
Yeah. And what I want to add to that, Gillian, is like I always wonder how people fail to see the frame of reference they see themselves in, right? Because you are again so much tied up to your identity. Like even the recent assassinations in America of just people talking their opinion is violent enough, and an example for this. But chill out, people. We're living in a unfathomable universe, and we are a tiny speck, as Carl Sagan said somewhere. And then we're not even a cosmic blip. We're smaller than that. And then you're holding all these things instead of trying to cooperate and understand and work towards something beautiful, because we are all conscious entities, and then we can work towards something. We can change our world just by, you're halfway across the world now, and then you're changing me and I'm changing you at some level. And that's all mesmerizingly beautiful. But what it's deeply saddening, what people try to hold on to is, I am right. I understand that you need ego to survive. Yes, we are all animal. There are limited resources in the earth, this planet and whatnot. So you might need a bit of, okay, I need this to survive. Yes, I get it. But if we learn to work together, we can create abundance. And I think we've all seen that. And again, tying it back, listening to the other person and changing your mind and implementing your 4 C's. I, I don't really understand why people don't see that.
It is baffling, isn't it? It is unfortunate. We're very insular, local, nose to the grindstone, and we don't look up very often. And, I like the work of Brian Cox. I don't know if you've come across him,
Yeah.
the English
Yes.
physicist too. One of the other things he says, as well as this thing about scale, is it is very possible that we are the only life in the universe. It's unlikely, but it is possible. It's certainly possible that we're the only intelligent life for a very, very, very long distance. I mean, galaxies, thousands of galaxies away, maybe. Well, if that's the case, this is precious. And it's tragic to waste it with this kind of squabbling that we're doing. And with the unfortunate kind of descent to the lowest common denominator, which we are creating. This is a problem of scale to me. Every human being has got darkness. It's part of us. There is violence in us. There is lust in us. There are things in us which we prefer not to allow to surface. But unfortunately, when you scale these things up with technology, then, we invent the internet, and what's the first thing that blooms on the internet? Pornography. So, the darkness that we have inside of us is being scaled up and made more available. And it is strangely seductive, isn't it? The violence, the hatred, judging other people, making them wrong, hating them for being who they are, and so forth. So the dark side of humanity, I think, it's always been there. We've always had wars. We've always had terrible things that people have done to other people. Now we're scaling that up and making it more accessible. That's very, very dangerous. And I do wish, as you absolutely rightly say, I do wish more people would simply look up at night and go, wow, we are so small, so insignificant, and so precious that we need to pay more attention to that way of thinking. And, it's a bit like sunflowers pointing towards the sun. We just need to be pointing in the right direction, heading for the light and turning our back on the darkness. And to me, listening is a really important enabler of that whole process. Because when we stop listening to each other, the darkness gets worse and worse.
Which brings me, as we near the end of this conversation, to one of the last questions I had. What would a world look like if it was consciously, actively listening to each other, from your experience?
Well, I don't have that experience, unfortunately. I'd love to have that experience. And
No.
I think it would be an amazing place. I mean, if you think about communities where people are dedicated to listening, whether that's religious communities, monks who are contemplating, listening carefully, and so forth, in all sorts of religions, or meditation communities, what you see in those places is peace, love, respect for silence. So it's a much more peaceful, quiet existence, which is, in my book, a very good thing. I'm not saying we should all be silent, but I do think silence is an important sound, and it's the baseline for all sound, and we need a better relationship with it. Many people have no relationship with it at all these days. So, another thing I teach is to try and reestablish that relationship. Just have a few minutes of silence a couple of times a day. Sit quietly, and your ears recalibrate. So you can see in the rare experiences we've had, I'll give you another one. 12-step fellowships the world over are extraordinary places where people come together in rooms and are dedicated to compassionately listening to people who share one after the other what's going on for them. There's no judgment. And at the end of it, people just say thanks and move on to the next person who shares. That's an almost unique experience in the world, I think. And if we had more groups like that, I mean, there are other self-help groups out there. There are groups for damaged people or hurt people who come together and do that kind of model where you sit, somebody shares, you all say thanks very much. And it's not about trying to fix them. It's not, oh, have you tried this? It's just, thank you for sharing. Well, that kind of listening is very rare. So I think you can see in places where listening is respected like that, where it's practiced, the results are healing, peace, connection, strong relationship, love, all the things that are good about being human, they come out of that. So that's one of the reasons, that's the main reason why I think listening is so worth pursuing.
Right. And the way you explained it, I see the commonalities in all those situations you explained is people not having a sense of ego or attaching their sense of identity to their beliefs, and trying to learn and grow from another person rather than like, if I want to grow, I want to learn more, right? It's as simple as that. Like if I hold on to 10 different things, then you're not growing past 10 different things unless you challenge yourself. And almost as though like losing your sense of self is the way to grow your tiny little piece of awareness on this planet.
Definitely important to be aware of ego. I mean, we've all got one, but if we can be aware of it and operate outside of it, as Eckhart Tolle is constantly saying in his books and teachings, then that makes life an awful lot easier. If we just are inside our ego, if we're given by that, the ego doesn't want to listen. It wants to be heard.
You mentioned about the brain's inability to remain in silence. Why can't we bear silence? Because I experience this. Like if I try, like I personally meditate a lot, and then if you go into silence, you get uncomfortable emotions, you get uncomfortable feelings, and you just want to get away from it.
Really? Well, that's not true of everybody. And it's like anything, it's really a question of practice, of mastering the relationship with silence. So if you don't do it very often, then I can understand the discomfort will arise because it's unusual, uncomfortable. It's just you. Um, there's a lovely walk of silence around an island in Lake Orta in
Hmm.
northern Italy, where you encounter little signs with meditations as you walk around in silence. And one of them is, in the silence you meet yourself. Now that may be an uncomfortable
Wow.
meeting for a lot of people. So I think a lot of this is about practice. We are so used to being distracted. We seek distraction. So we're obsessed with intensity, not intimacy now. It's all about intense experiences. So video gaming, films, music, whatever it may be that we, obviously social media, that we distract ourselves with at every waking moment, doing three things at the same time. Put all this down and it's different. Now, once upon a time, the world was a very quiet place before we invented machines a couple hundred years ago. You know, there was the odd war, blacksmith's hammer maybe, lightning, thunder, and so forth. But generally speaking, the world was a very quiet place.
Mm.
And we were used to existing in the peace and tranquility of nature. Wind, water, birds is what surrounded us. And again, I mourn that over half of humanity now lives in cities, and most of those people don't ever encounter those three sounds, wind, water, and birds. They encounter street noise, which has become unreasonable. There's a chart in my new book, Sound Effects. There's a chart of the noisiest cities in the world, and Dhaka in Bangladesh is number one at over
Mm.
120 decibels average noise level. That's rock concert loud, average noise level in the streets of that city. How anybody can live in that, I have no idea. It's certainly not good for you. And, it just in so many ways, it's not good for you. So I do understand that people living in cities surrounded by distraction and noise get used to that. We become, you know, almost dependent on it. So people get to the point where they walk into a room and they have to turn something on. because the silent room is threatening. I do urge to push
Interesting.
against that, and
Hmm.
it's a question of practice, like anything else. If you just give yourself a few minutes a couple of times a day, it becomes easier and easier, and you start to value it.
Well, that's amazing. Thank you, Julian, for taking your time today to spend 1 hour or so on this beautiful planet, on this journey. We are all together in this cosmic vast universe. And hopefully I was able to be a good listener for you, to be in front of a person who's who's done most of his life understanding listening. Hopefully I was able to listen to you and do my due diligence.
It was an
um
absolute pleasure, and you did a great job. Thank you.
Thank you, that means a lot. So where can people find you with your work, what you're working on, if they are to reach out to you on what you have to give out to the world? Can you please tell us
I'd love
that?
to I'd love to invite anybody who's interested in listening to join me in the Listening Society, which is my online community and resource. It's full of training courses and papers and videos and sounds and all sorts of things. If you're interested in improving your listening, it's a great place to go. And I'll give you a URL which you can put in the show notes here, which will give everybody a free month's membership. It's only £1 a day to be a member, but I'd love to give you a free month to try it out. You'll get everything but the courses on that free month. Also, there's, of course, my website, juliantreasure.com. And then there are the 5 TED Talks, which are freely available. Go to TED.com and search on Julian Treasure, and you'll find my talks about sound, listening, and speaking. And you'll find me all over the place. I did a Diary of a CEO with Stephen Bartlett. That's been quite popular. It's another hour's conversation. Not as spiritual as this one, I think, but nevertheless, you can find me on things like this. So by all means do. And if you want to communicate with me, I'm very happy to hear from people. If I can ever help you with training, coaching, chops, it's whatever I do, at juliantreasure.com. Would love to hear from you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Julian. And one last question. I ask this to every guest on my show. What is your meaning of life?
Listen.
I think we'll just keep it at that.